It was a bright Saturday morning in a small and quiet neighborhood called Maple Grove. The houses stood side by side, each with green lawns and clean fences. Birds were singing, children were playing on bicycles, and everything looked peaceful. But for Tom, who lived in the middle of the street, this day was going to be different from all the others. Tom was a calm man in his late 50s. He had worked as a mechanic for many years before retiring. He loved his small house and enjoyed gardening. Every morning he watered his flowers, fed a stray cat that often visited him, and then sat on his porch with a cup of tea. He was not a man who liked trouble, but sometimes trouble came knocking even when he did nothing wrong. Maple Grove had an active HOA, the Homeowners Association. The HOA looked after neighborhood rules, yard maintenance, and house appearances. Most people liked the idea because it kept the area clean, but there was one person who took those rules far too seriously. Her name was Karen. Karen was in her 40s, always dressed neatly, and always carried a clipboard with papers. She believed she was the protector of the neighborhood. Every week she walked down the street checking lawns, mailboxes, and fences. If she found anything she did not like, she wrote it down and sent warning letters. People often called her the inspector. Tom had met Karen a few times before. Their first meeting had been polite. She had told him about the HOA guidelines and how residents should follow them. Tom listened and agreed to follow the basic rules. But as time passed, he noticed Karen's visits were becoming more frequent. She seemed to look for problems where there were none. One afternoon, Karen had even complained that Tom's grass was half an inch taller than allowed. Another time, she said the color of his shed door looked too faded. Tom fixed the small issues just to avoid arguments, but inside he felt annoyed. He knew Karen meant well in her own way, but her strictness was becoming strange. On that Saturday morning, Tom was in his backyard trimming bushes when he heard someone call his name. He looked up and saw Karen standing in front of his gate with her clipboard. "Good morning, Tom," she said with her usual tight smile. "We need to talk about something important." Tom wiped his hands on a towel and walked over. "Morning, Karen. What's the matter now?" he asked in a polite tone. Karen held up a small silver key between her fingers. "This is the master key for all HOA-approved houses," she said proudly. "We're checking for safety compliance today. I'll just use this key to make sure your door locks meet the standard." Tom blinked in surprise. "You want to check my door locks?" he asked. Karen nodded. "Yes, every home must be checked once a year. It's in the updated HOA guidelines." Tom frowned slightly. "I didn't get any notice about that," he said calmly. Karen flipped through the papers on her clipboard. "It was emailed to everyone last month," she said. "Some people don't read their emails carefully." Tom smiled a little. "Maybe I missed it, but even then I don't think anyone should open another person's door without permission." Karen crossed her arms. "This is standard procedure. You can watch while I test the key. It will only take a second." Tom shook his head. "I'm sorry, Karen, but I can't allow that. You have no reason to enter my house." Karen's smile disappeared. Her eyes narrowed. "Tom, I am just doing my duty," she said. "If your door lock doesn't match HOA standards, you could be fined." "I understand that," Tom said gently, "but you can report it to me in writing. I'll fix it if needed, but no one is going inside my house today." Karen sighed loudly and stepped closer to the door. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said sharply. "If you have nothing to hide, you should let me check." Tom crossed his arms and stood firm. "It's not about hiding anything. It's about respect. You can't open someone's house without permission." Karen frowned deeply. She looked at the key in her hand and then at the lock on Tom's door. Her pride would not let her back down. She walked to the front door and pushed the key into the lock anyway. The key did not fit. She turned it once, twice, and then harder, but the key refused to move. She muttered under her breath and tried again. The key slipped and made a scraping sound. Tom watched silently, his calm face hiding his irritation. "Karen, I told you not to do that," he said. Karen stepped back, red in the face. "This key should work," she said angrily. "Every house is supposed to have the same standard lock." "Well," Tom said softly, "it seems mine isn't one of them." Karen looked at him as if he had committed a serious crime. "You replaced your lock without HOA approval, didn't you?" she demanded. "I replaced it last year after the old one broke," Tom said. "It's my house. I used a safe lock from the store." "That's against the HOA maintenance code," Karen said firmly. All locks must be approved, Tom sighed. Karen, there was no such rule when I changed it. Maybe it's new, but you can't force your key into my door. Karen took a deep breath. I will report this, she said. In fact, I might have to call someone about this. Tom looked confused. Call someone? Like who? Karen raised her chin. If a resident refuses an HOA safety inspection, it can be treated as a violation. I'll call the sheriff. Tom blinked, unsure if she was serious. Karen, you can't be serious. This is not a police matter. But Karen had already taken out her phone. You leave me no choice, she said, dialing a number. Tom watched, speechless. He had seen many strange things in his life, but this was something new. A neighbor calling the police over a door lock. He stood still while she spoke loudly into her phone, explaining that a non-compliant resident was refusing access for safety reasons. After ending the call, Karen looked at Tom with a satisfied expression. They'll send someone soon, she said confidently. Tom tried not to laugh. You really called 911? I had to, she said. Rules are rules. Tom decided not to argue further. He went back to his porch, sat on his chair, and picked up his cup of tea again. Inside, he was a little nervous, but he trusted that the truth would speak for itself. He had done nothing wrong. A few minutes later, Karen stood near the sidewalk waiting for the officers to arrive. She looked proud and sure of herself. The other neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering and watching the scene unfold. Tom's cat walked up and sat beside him. He smiled and petted it gently. Well, buddy, he said quietly, this will be interesting. Little did Karen know that the sheriff coming to respond to her call was someone she already knew very well. Someone who had grown up in that same house. Someone who was not going to be pleased with her actions. The afternoon sun hung high in the sky when the sound of a police siren echoed faintly from a distance. The neighbors who had been peeking through their curtains stepped back quickly. They did not want to look nosy, but curiosity filled the air. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when the police arrived at Tom's house. Karen stood tall at the end of Tom's driveway. She had her clipboard under her arm and her phone in her hand. Her face carried a mixture of pride and anger. She believed she had done the right thing. To her, she was protecting the rules of the neighborhood. She kept glancing at Tom's door as if expecting him to suddenly open it and admit guilt. Tom, however, sat quietly on his porch chair. His cup of tea had gone cold, but he did not care. He was not angry, just disappointed. He could not understand why someone would make such a big issue out of a simple door lock. He had been a good neighbor, kept his house clean, and followed the rules as best he could. But Karen had turned this into a personal mission. A few minutes later, a black sheriff vehicle turned into the street and stopped near Tom's house. Karen straightened her back and smiled proudly. Some neighbors peeked again through their curtains when they saw the vehicle. A few even whispered to one another, wondering if something serious had happened. The car door opened and a young sheriff stepped out. He wore a neat brown uniform and a badge that shined in the sun. His name tag said Ryan. His face was calm but alert, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who knew how to handle tense situations. Karen walked toward the car before Ryan could even take a full step forward. Thank goodness you're here, she said quickly. I am the HOA officer for this neighborhood. We have a resident who refused a mandatory inspection. He also changed his house locks without HOA approval. Ryan nodded politely. All right, ma'am, let's take it step by step. Where's the resident in question? Karen pointed to Tom, who was still sitting on the porch. That's him. He refused access and now he's being uncooperative. Ryan looked up at the porch and suddenly his serious face softened. For a moment he almost smiled. The man on the porch was not a stranger. It was his father. Tom recognized him immediately too. His calm face brightened with a hint of relief. Well, look who it is, he said in a gentle tone. Good afternoon, officer. Karen blinked in confusion. Wait, you two know each other? She asked, her confident tone weakening slightly. Ryan walked toward the porch with a small smile. Yes, ma'am, he said. That's my father. Karen's eyes widened. Her face turned red. She had not expected this. She looked from Ryan to Tom, completely lost for words. Tom stood up slowly. I didn't know you'd be the one they sent, he said with a chuckle. Ryan nodded. Small world, isn't it? Karen shifted nervously. Well, Officer Ryan, I hope this won't affect your judgment. This is a matter of HOA law. Ryan kept his calm professional tone. "I'll handle it by the book," he said. Then he turned to Tom. "Dad, can you tell me what happened here?" Tom explained everything from the start. He told Ryan how Karen came to check his door locks with a so-called master key, how she tried to open his door without permission, and how he had simply refused because he wanted privacy. He spoke calmly without anger or blame. Ryan listened carefully and nodded. "So she tried to open your door herself?" he asked. "Yes," Tom said. "She pushed the key in even after I said no." Ryan turned to Karen, who was clutching her clipboard tightly. "Is that true, ma'am?" Karen hesitated. "Well, yes, but it was only a routine safety inspection. I have the right as an HOA officer to make sure all locks meet the community standard." Ryan's tone remained polite but firm. "Ma'am, the HOA does not have the right to enter a private residence without the owner's consent. That would be considered trespassing. Did you receive any written authorization from this resident or a legal warrant?" Karen looked offended. "Of course not. This is just an HOA matter, not a legal one." Ryan nodded slightly. "Then you had no authority to attempt entry. You can make written reports or send notices, but you cannot try to unlock someone's door." Karen's face tightened. "I was only following the HOA rulebook," she said defensively. "It says homes must use approved locks." Tom finally spoke again. "I changed my lock last year because the old one was damaged. Nobody told me it was against any rule." Ryan looked at Karen again. "Do you have a copy of the rule that says residents must allow physical inspection of their locks?" Karen opened her folder and flipped through pages quickly. Her fingers shook slightly as she looked for the line she wanted. After a few moments, she stopped flipping and looked up. "It's in the update from last month," she said softly. "But maybe it says visual inspection." Ryan gave a polite nod. "That's very different from trying a key." The crowd of curious neighbors was growing. People stood at their lawns pretending to water plants while secretly listening. Some whispered quietly about how bold Karen had been to call the police for such a thing. Ryan turned to his father again. "Did she cause any damage to your door lock?" Tom shook his head. "No damage, just a few scratches. Nothing serious." Ryan wrote something in his small notepad. "All right," he said. "Then I'll record this as a misunderstanding. No criminal act was committed, but I'll advise both parties on boundaries." Karen looked uneasy. "Boundaries? Are you suggesting I did something wrong?" Ryan answered calmly. "I'm suggesting that entering or attempting to enter someone's home without permission is never appropriate, even for HOA matters." Tom tried to keep the situation light. "No harm done," he said kindly. "I just want to make sure it doesn't happen again." Ryan nodded. "That's fair. I'll make sure there's no more confusion." Karen looked around at the watching neighbors and felt embarrassed. She had called the police expecting support, but now she was being corrected in front of everyone. Her pride was hurt, but deep down she knew she had gone too far. She cleared her throat and said stiffly, "Well, I suppose there was a misunderstanding. I only wanted to help the neighborhood stay safe." Ryan smiled politely. "That's appreciated, ma'am. Everyone wants a safe neighborhood. But sometimes the best way to help is to respect each other's privacy." Karen nodded silently. She took a step back from the porch. "I'll update my report then," she said, avoiding eye contact. Tom nodded. "That's a good idea. And maybe next time just knock and talk first." Karen gave a small forced smile and turned to walk away. She looked smaller somehow, her confidence fading as she headed down the street. The clipboard that once made her feel powerful now just looked heavy in her hands. Ryan turned to his father with a half smile. "You sure know how to keep things interesting," he said jokingly. Tom laughed. "I didn't plan this. I just wanted a quiet morning." Ryan shook his head. "Well, you got more than that." As the sheriff vehicle drove away, the neighbors began to relax. Some waved to Tom, some smiled, and a few even clapped quietly from their porches. They admired how calmly Tom had handled everything. Tom went back to his chair, poured himself another cup of tea, and looked at the peaceful street. He loved his son's professionalism and felt proud of how Ryan had handled the matter. But he also knew this was not the end. Karen was not the kind of person to give up so easily. He looked at his door, at the faint scratch mark near the lock, and sighed softly. He hoped that the lesson had been learned, but in his heart he knew that Karen's pride might push her to come back again. The next morning came with a soft breeze and the sound of birds outside. The neighborhood of Maple Grove looked peaceful again. The lawns were green, the streets were quiet, and the sun shone gently over the houses. It was the kind of calm morning that Tom always loved. He made his usual cup of tea and sat on his porch, hoping for a quiet start to the day. But deep inside, he knew that what happened the day before had already become the main topic in the neighborhood. He could almost feel the eyes of a few neighbors watching him from behind their windows. Some looked curious, some amused, and some a little nervous. He smiled to himself. He did not care much about gossip. What mattered to him was peace in his home. He had raised his son Ryan with patience and respect for others, and seeing him handle that strange situation so calmly had made him proud. Tom thought about Karen for a moment. He wondered if she had learned her lesson after the embarrassing scene yesterday. He hoped she would move on and let things go. But knowing her nature, he also knew she might not stop easily. By late morning, Tom went to check his garden. His flowers were blooming, and the small tomato plants he had been growing looked healthy. He knelt down, started trimming dry leaves, and hummed softly to himself. At the same time, 2 houses away, Karen sat inside her living room with her laptop open and her clipboard by her side. She was still upset about what had happened. The embarrassment of calling the sheriff and realizing the officer was Tom's son had hurt her pride deeply. She felt that everyone was talking about her. In her mind, she was not the villain. She was the one trying to protect the community rules. But now people looked at her differently. She could not let that stand. She began typing a long email to the HOA board. She explained that one resident had refused a lock inspection, and that this could be a potential security threat. She did not mention the part where she had tried to open the door herself. Instead, she wrote that she was performing her duty. After sending the email, she sat back in her chair, feeling slightly better. But then her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the HOA board members named Mike. "Karen, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. Can you come to the office this afternoon?" Her heart sank. She stared at the message for a moment. Then she typed back, "Of course I'll be there." Later that day, Karen walked into the small HOA office located near the community park. The office was simple, with a desk, some chairs, and a big bulletin board filled with neighborhood notices. Mike, a friendly middle-aged man with glasses, greeted her politely. "Karen," he said, "thanks for coming. Please sit down." Karen sat down, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I assume this is about the situation yesterday," she said in a firm tone. Mike nodded. "Yes, we received a few messages from residents. It seems there was some confusion between you and Tom." Karen frowned slightly. There was no confusion. He refused a safety inspection. "I only wanted to make sure his lock met the HOA standard." Mike sighed. "Karen, the HOA rules never said you can try to unlock someone's door. You're allowed to perform visual checks from the outside, not physical ones." Karen's face tightened. "But how can I confirm a lock's standard by just looking at it?" Mike leaned forward. "That's not your responsibility to test. You can note your concerns, report them, and the board can send written requests to the homeowner. Trying to use a key on someone's house is beyond your authority." Karen felt her stomach twist. "So I'm the one being blamed now," Mike shook his head. "No one is blaming you, but this caused a scene. And calling the police made it worse. People are uncomfortable." Karen looked down at her clipboard. She felt a mix of anger and shame. "I was just trying to keep the community safe," she said softly. "I understand," Mike said gently. "But next time, let the board handle things formally. Please take a break from inspections for a few days. Let everything cool down." Karen nodded silently. She stood up, thanked him politely, and walked out. Her face burned with embarrassment. As she walked back home, she saw a few neighbors standing near their lawns. They smiled politely, but she could feel their eyes following her. She quickened her steps, trying to ignore them. When she reached home, she sat on her couch, still fuming. She felt like everyone was turning against her. She could not stop thinking about Tom and how calm he had looked even when she was upset. That calmness had made her feel powerless. As the day went on, Karen decided she needed to prove she was not wrong. She started going through HOA papers again. She looked for anything that could support her actions. After hours of searching, she found a small section that talked about security checks. It mentioned that the HOA could recommend safety inspections, but did not specify how they should be done. She smiled a little, thinking it could help her argument. Meanwhile, in another part of the neighborhood, Tom was enjoying his evening tea when his phone rang. It was Ryan. "Hey, Dad," Ryan said cheerfully. "How's everything at home?" Tom laughed softly. "Peaceful now. I even saw Karen walking back from the HOA office. She didn't look happy. Ryan chuckled. I heard about that. Apparently the HOA board called her in for a talk. I think they're making sure she understands the rules. Tom nodded. That's good. She needed that. Ryan's tone turned more serious. By the way, I might get another call about the same neighborhood. I hope it's not her again. Tom raised his eyebrows. What happened now? Dispatch told us she called earlier today, Ryan said. Something about a possible code violation on another street. I'm not sure yet, but I might have to check it out. Tom sighed. She just doesn't stop, does she? Ryan laughed. Some people can't help themselves. Don't worry, though. I'll handle it if it comes my way. After ending the call, Tom leaned back in his chair. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. He looked around the quiet street and felt grateful for his calm nature. But deep down he knew that Karen was still restless. That night Karen could not sleep. She kept thinking about how she had been told to take a break. Her pride hurt more than anything else. She convinced herself that she had been misunderstood. She believed she was only trying to help. She got up from bed, went to her window and looked out at the street. Tom's house was visible from there, peaceful and dark with the porch light glowing softly. She frowned slightly. In her mind, she thought, maybe she could talk to him and clear the air. Maybe she could make him see that she was only doing her duty. But before she could plan anything, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from another HOA member named Lisa. It read, Karen, please don't do anything on your own again. Let us handle it. Karen stared at the message and typed back, of course I won't. But inside, she knew she was not done yet. As the clock moved closer to midnight, Karen sat at her kitchen table, her eyes on the clipboard once more. She started writing notes again about door locks, safety checks, and possible violations. Out in the street, everything was calm. Tom was asleep, unaware that another round of trouble was already forming in the mind of his determined neighbor. The peace of Maple Grove was about to be tested again, and once more Tom's family would be right in the middle of it. The next few days in Maple Grove passed quietly on the surface, but beneath that calm, whispers about the HOA incident still floated around. People talked softly when Karen walked by. They smiled politely, but their eyes showed curiosity and judgment. She tried to act as if nothing bothered her, but deep down she felt humiliated. Karen had always believed she was doing the right thing for the community. She liked order, she liked following rules, and she liked when people respected her authority. But after the meeting with the HOA board and the embarrassing moment with the sheriff, she felt her respect slipping away. She wanted it back. She decided that the only way to regain her image was to show everyone she was still a responsible leader. But this time she promised herself she would be careful. She would not make the same mistake again. On Wednesday morning, Karen picked up her clipboard and walked around the neighborhood. She smiled at a few neighbors, noting down small details like overgrown bushes or faded paint. She was trying to act calm and professional. When she passed by Tom's house, she paused for a moment. His garden looked perfect, the grass neatly trimmed and the flowers colorful. There was nothing to complain about, yet she stood there for a few seconds as if her feet did not want to move. She saw Tom sitting on the porch reading a newspaper. He noticed her and gave a small nod. "Morning, Karen," he said politely. Karen hesitated, then replied, "Morning, Tom." It was the first time they had spoken since the police call. For a second, it felt almost normal, but Karen's pride would not allow her to fully relax. She looked at her clipboard, pretended to write something, and walked away quickly. Tom watched her leave, shaking his head slightly. He did not feel angry anymore, just tired of the whole thing. He hoped she would finally let it go. Later that afternoon, Ryan stopped by his father's house after work. He was still in his sheriff uniform and had a friendly smile on his face. "Hey, Dad," he said, stepping inside. "Just wanted to check on you. No more surprises from the HOA, right?" Tom laughed softly. "Not yet." Karen's been quiet. "Maybe she's learned her lesson." Ryan nodded. "Let's hope so. I heard from one of my coworkers that the HOA board gave her a warning. If she causes another problem, they might remove her from her position." Tom raised an eyebrow. That would be a relief for everyone. They both laughed, and for a moment the house felt warm and peaceful again. Ryan stayed for dinner, talking about his work and sharing stories about other strange calls he had handled. While they talked, Karen sat in her own kitchen, drinking tea and staring at her clipboard. She could not stop thinking about how people now looked at her differently. She missed the respect she used to have. In her heart, she felt that Tom was the reason she had lost it. She convinced herself that if she could somehow prove he had broken another rule, people would trust her again. She opened her old inspection notes and read through them one by one. Then she saw something that caught her attention. It was a note from last year saying that Tom's fence color had not been updated to the new HOA standard. She had forgotten about it because the board changed the rule later. But now in her mind, it became a perfect excuse to visit him again. The next morning, she printed a paper that looked like an official notice. It said, "Homeowner must verify fence color compliance within 48 hours. She walked straight to Tom's house and taped it neatly to his front gate. When Tom stepped outside later, he saw the paper flapping in the breeze. He pulled it down and read it carefully. His eyes widened slightly. "Fence color compliance?" he murmured. His fence was painted light brown, just like the HOA had approved years ago. He knew this was another one of Karen's tricks. He sighed deeply, walked back inside, and picked up his phone. He called the HOA office directly and explained what had happened. Mike, the same board member who had spoken to Karen before, answered the call. "Tom, I'm really sorry about this," Mike said. "There is no such active rule. Karen was told not to act on her own again. I'll take care of it right away." Tom thanked him and hung up. He didn't want another scene, but something told him that Karen was about to create one anyway. An hour later, as Tom sat on his porch reading, he heard footsteps. Karen came walking down the sidewalk with her clipboard again, looking determined. Before she could reach the gate, a black sheriff car turned into the street and stopped nearby. Tom recognized it instantly. Ryan stepped out, looking surprised to see both of them. He had just finished another call nearby when dispatch informed him that someone in Maple Grove had made another complaint about property rule violations. He already had a guess who it was. Karen froze when she saw Ryan get out of the car. Her face turned pale. "Oh, it's you again," she said awkwardly. Ryan nodded. "Afternoon, ma'am. I was told there's a complaint in this area. Is everything all right?" Karen swallowed hard. "Yes, well, I just issued a notice to this resident about fence color violations. It's part of HOA policy." Tom stood up and crossed his arms. "Ryan, she posted a false notice on my gate."
"I already called the HOA office, and they said the rule doesn't exist anymore." Ryan looked at Karen calmly.
"Is that true, ma'am? Did you confirm with the HOA before posting this notice?" Karen hesitated. "I thought the rule was still active. It's in last year's document." Ryan nodded slowly. "But the HOA board gave you direct instructions not to act alone, didn't they?" Karen's face turned red. "I was only trying to fix the mistake from before. I wanted to show that I can still do my job." Ryan's voice was firm but not unkind. "Ma'am, doing your job doesn't mean breaking the rules again. You were already warned about this. Posting a false notice on someone's property could be considered harassment." Karen's eyes widened. "Harassment? I didn't mean to harass anyone." Tom spoke softly. "Karen, you need to stop. I don't want trouble. I just want peace in this neighborhood." The neighbors had started watching again. A few people had stepped out onto their lawns. Some held their phones, pretending to check messages while secretly listening. Karen looked around, realizing that she was once again the center of attention. Her heart raced. She hated that feeling. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold her clipboard still. Ryan sighed. "Ma'am, I think it's time you take the HOA's advice and step back for a while. You're creating unnecessary tension. If this continues, the board or the sheriff's office might have to take formal action." Karen looked down, her eyes watering slightly. She had never felt so small in her life. All she had wanted was to be respected. But now she stood in the middle of the street feeling foolish in front of everyone. Tom took a step closer, his tone gentle. "Karen, no one here hates you. We just want to live peacefully. Maybe it's time to rest and let the board handle things from now on." Karen wiped her eyes quickly and nodded. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. "I just wanted to do something good." Ryan gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You can still do good, ma'am. Just start by being kind to your neighbors." Karen nodded again, unable to speak. She turned slowly and walked back to her house. Her shoulders were slumped and the clipboard hung loosely in her hand. Tom watched her go, feeling a mix of pity and relief. He turned to Ryan and said, "You handled that well, son." Ryan smiled. "I'm just glad it didn't turn into another big scene." The neighbors went back inside. the street returning to quiet once more. Tom and Ryan sat on the porch for a while, talking about simple things. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with warm colors. As they watched the fading light, Tom said softly, "I hope that's the end of it." Ryan nodded. "I think it might be. But even if it's not, we'll handle it the same way." Calmly and with patience, Tom smiled. "You learned that from me." Ryan laughed. "Maybe I did." For the first time in many days, the air around Maple Grove felt lighter. The shadows of anger and pride began to fade, leaving behind quiet lessons about respect and understanding. The morning after the strange and dramatic night, Tom sat on his porch with a warm cup of coffee. The air felt lighter, as if the neighborhood itself had calmed down after the tension. The sun peeked through the clouds, birds sang near the old oak tree, and the world felt peaceful again. But inside his mind, Tom kept thinking about what had happened the day before. He was proud of how Ryan had handled everything. The boy had shown calmness, patience, and respect in front of everyone, even when Karen had lost control. It was something any father would be proud of. A few hours later, Tom saw a familiar figure walking down the street. It was Karen holding a small basket in her hands. She walked slower than usual, and her proud posture was replaced by a humble one. Tom took a quiet breath. He knew she was coming to talk, and even though part of him wanted to ignore her, he reminded himself that kindness often did more than anger. When Karen reached his porch, she stopped a few feet away. Her face looked tired and her voice was soft when she spoke. "Good morning, Tom. I came to say sorry." Tom nodded slowly and motioned toward the empty chair next to him. "Morning, Karen. You can sit if you like." She hesitated for a second, but then sat down. The basket she carried had some muffins and small cookies. She placed it on the table between them. "I baked these myself," she said quietly. "I thought it would be right to bring something." Tom smiled a little. "That's thoughtful of you." For a few seconds there was silence. Only the wind and the sound of leaves filled the air. Then Karen took a deep breath. "I realized how wrong I was yesterday. I shouldn't have acted like that. I thought being in the HOA meant I had authority over everything. But I crossed the line. I tried to use a key that wasn't mine. I made a scene, and when your son showed up, I felt ashamed." Tom nodded. "I appreciate you saying that. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. Ryan told me he thought you were just stressed and maybe taking too much responsibility." Karen looked down. "Maybe that's true. I've been trying to make everything perfect in this neighborhood. But I forgot that people aren't rules. They're neighbors. I thought having power meant being respected, but I see now that respect comes from fairness and kindness." Tom leaned back in his chair. "You know, this place can be nice if we all work together, but no one likes being treated like a child. The HOA should help, not control. You're smart, Karen. You can still make things better if you start by listening." Karen gave a small smile. Maybe I needed to hear that. They talked for a while about simple things. The trees, the parking rules, the mailbox that needed fixing. It was a calm and friendly talk, far from the shouting and arguing of yesterday. Before leaving, Karen looked at Tom and said, "Tell Ryan I'm sorry too. He did his job well and he was very respectful." "I'll make sure to thank him personally," Tom nodded. "He'll appreciate that." Later that day, Ryan came home after his shift. When Tom told him about Karen's visit, Ryan smiled. "That's good, Dad. I didn't want her to get in trouble. I just wanted her to understand she couldn't treat people like that." Tom patted his son on the shoulder. "You did the right thing, son. I'm proud of you. You stayed calm when things got messy. That's what real strength looks like." Ryan grinned shyly. "Thanks, Dad. I guess I learned it from you." In the evening, the neighborhood felt warmer than before. People were talking near the mailboxes. Kids were playing on their bikes, and even Karen was walking around greeting people politely. It felt like the tension that had been hanging over the community had finally lifted. A few days later, there was a small HOA meeting at the park. Tom went mostly to listen. This time, the meeting had a different tone. Karen started by standing up and addressing everyone. "I want to apologize for how I behaved. I was wrong to act like I had control over your homes. From now on, I'll make sure our HOA helps people, not bothers them." Everyone clapped. A few people even smiled at her warmly. It was clear that they appreciated her honesty. Tom watched quietly, feeling that maybe things were changing for the better. After the meeting, Karen came up to Tom and said, "I meant what I said. I also talked to the HOA board about revising some of our rules. We'll make sure everything is fair." "That sounds great," Tom said. "If we all cooperate, this place will be peaceful again." The following weekend, Ryan was invited by the sheriff's department to speak briefly at a community event about dealing with neighborhood disputes calmly. Tom went to watch him. Standing tall in his uniform, Ryan spoke to the crowd in a clear, confident voice. He said, "Sometimes people argue because they forget they're part of the same team. The key is to listen before reacting. Respect can fix more problems than anger ever could." When the event ended, Tom felt a wave of pride. He realized that his son was not just a young man wearing a badge. He was someone who understood fairness and compassion. As the sun set, Tom and Ryan returned home. They saw Karen waving from her porch. Tom waved back and she smiled genuinely. It was a small gesture, but it showed that peace had returned. Later that night, Tom sat on his porch again. The stars were out and the streetlights cast a gentle glow over the quiet houses. He thought about how one small event had turned into a lesson for everyone. The incident that started with anger ended with understanding. Karen learned humility, Ryan gained experience, and Tom found pride in his son's wisdom. He smiled as he looked at the calm street and whispered softly, "Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the loudest moments." Inside the house, Ryan was sitting with a book reading about law enforcement and community service. He looked peaceful. Tom knew his son had chosen a path that made a difference, and deep down he felt thankful that everything had happened the way it did. From that day forward, the neighborhood changed. People communicated more. Meetings were respectful. Karen became known for her fairness rather than her control, and whenever someone new moved into the area, Tom would smile and tell them, "It's a good place here. We had a few rough days, but we learned how to be good neighbors." The story that had once been a source of tension turned into a story of respect and growth. The man whose door Karen tried to open became her friend. The young sheriff who arrived to handle the situation became an example of calm leadership. And the neighborhood, once divided by pride and power, became united by understanding. As the cool night wind passed through the trees, Tom whispered a quiet thank you to life for teaching them all something valuable. Sometimes peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from facing it with patience, honesty, and heart. And in that small corner of the world, peace had finally found its home.